Today, we're going to break down one of the most critical components, but one of those that are least discussed in just about every single residential real estate transaction here in the Lowcountry. So let's get after it. Hey everybody, today we're talking about one of the most critical components of just about every residential real estate transaction, at least that we're involved in, but probably one of the components that people just don't talk that much about, and it's the seller disclosure. And I know that sounds a little dry, a little boring, but guys, this is the meat of the transaction to a great extent because of how critically important the seller disclosure form is. So in the state of South Carolina, it came about maybe in 1993, 1994. So over 30 years, it's been in maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 different iterations. Latest iteration was 2023, I think. So even that's coming up on 3 years ago. And what we've seen is the South Carolina Real Estate Commission that promulgates this form that we put in front of sellers and then sellers put in front of buyers has evolved over the years. And they've learned, it's like, oh, we better ask this question. Oh, next time, boy, there have been some problems. We better ask this question. And why does that matter? It's because when they learn from that perspective, what they're hearing about was post-closing problems. Like, oh, we should have asked the seller to answer this question because what we started finding was there was another buyer after closing saying, well, nobody ever told me about X, Y, or Z. So today we just kind of want to get after it and just share with you guys kind of what this form's all about, and maybe tell you a few of the items maybe where sellers kind of get tripped up, et cetera, and what the process is. So let me start off by just saying process. Okay, so order of process, typically a seller should complete this seller disclosure form. And there are some exclusions, right, Chris? There's some instances where a seller is excluded from having to complete this form, but in 95% of the cases, this form, which you've got in your hand, is being completed. And what we're finding is that by order of process, I think the theory is a seller should complete that form when they're coming to market. You don't want to complete it 6 months before you come to market. You want to complete it right about the time that you're coming to market. And why is that? Because then the next step is that buyers should have access to that form. And there's a place for them to sign it, by the way. Sellers sign it, buyers sign it to acknowledge they've received it. The buyer should have access to that form before making an offer on the property, right? Because there could be information that they need to know about. And so one of the things that we want to just address today is if you think you're involved potentially in the future in buying real estate in the state of South Carolina, this form's for the whole state, but certainly in the Lowcountry, or selling, we'd love people to get this form way ahead of time. So we'd love to offer to send it to you at the end of the video. We'll make sure you got information about how we can get that to you. But today we want to break it down and kind of go through that process. But that's the order process that we typically are dealing with. And so let's talk about, Chris, just kind of what that form is sort of doing, right? It's focused on the time that the owner has owned the property and what kind of questions is it going after? Like what's the main goal?
Well, a couple things to be considered of is it's a seller disclosure. So your real estate agent is not supposed to fill this out. Now an attorney can fill it out for you, or a family member can fill it out for you and that sort of thing. But really this is the seller's responsibility. It's the seller's opportunity to let a potential buyer know what they know about the property. It's not a document where the seller has to go and start doing all this research and calling people and looking through old files. I mean, just what they know about the property. And the other thing to be thoughtful of is it's done beforehand. So like you said, the buyer can reference it before making the offer. But the disclosure is not just about bad things about a property,
right?
Okay, it's about information. It's a document that provides information to other participants of the real estate transaction so they will know basically what the seller knows.
Yeah, and one thing on that is it's kind of a living document because you might complete it, on the Wednesday before you go to market, and a month later, if you're still on market and all of a sudden something's happened or changed at the property, you're compelled to update that disclosure.
That's a really good point. And because a lot of times a seller will fill this out, there's a place to date it and timestamp it. But if something changes, well, let's just take one example. It specifically asks for the age of a roof.
Right.
Well, the seller puts the age of the roof, maybe it was 20 years ago. They go on market, get some feedback back and forth, decide they need to replace the roof, they replace the roof. They need to take the document, they can scratch it out, they can redo it, initial it, redate it, but that's, like you said, a living document that will change through time.
And by the way, if you come to market or you just put on a new roof, you want to show that it's got a 2026 roof or whatever that
I
is.
love the fact that a property disclosure allows a seller to not only talk about the bad things, but also talk about the good things. I mean, I've seen property disclosures that have addendums to them that list out all the upgraded features, or maybe the disclosure is a way that a seller wants to communicate with a buyer, maybe some components of the house that the buyer might not understand that the seller wants the buyer to understand.
Yeah, you can dig in and share other information about the community that you're involved in, et cetera. So it's not just about the bad, right? Sort of the problems. It can also be about some selling components to the
You
property.
bring up a good point, because on the disclosure, there's an addendum. It's usually the last page. And what the addendum is all about living in a neighborhood that has restrictive covenants, it has bylaws, it has rules. And so that's something that if you live in a gated community or a community that has those restrictive covenants, you're used to it. But if your buyer is coming from somewhere and they're not familiar with that, they need to understand what it's like living in a community like that.
Right. We sometimes, think about where sellers get tripped up a little bit, right? And so what does that mean to get tripped up? Well, this the form's fine. It's 6 or 7 pages long. We deal with it every day. You put it in front of a home seller and they're not typically familiar with it. And it's a government form, so it's fine. But it can be a little confusing, and the way things are worded, et cetera, can require a little bit of insight. But a seller might approach things, let's say you've got someone who's lived in a gated community for 20 years. And they take for granted that they can have as many pets as they want, and that their guests come and go because they call them a pass all the time, et cetera. But they're not actually thinking about that there are actually restrictions in place.
Sure.
That's one of the trip ups that we tend to see is on that.
It is, and
addendum.
it's a trip up because it's not a singular question.
Right.
Like it will say the reference to private streets. Well, that's in a section with easements.
Right.
And so if you're just skimming it and you're not taking it and reading every word, you can say, well, I don't have any easements.
Right.
Or encroachments. But then you don't read the second line that says, are the roads private?
Right.
And the reason we need to know that is because folks coming from a city where the city takes care of the roads. If you have a storm, they clean it up, they repave it. If the roads are private, guess who does that?
Yeah.
The homeowners.
You and your homeowners group, right?
That's right. So it's important.
Another one that they added in recently in that 2023 iteration is right of first refusal, which a lot of people don't think about that, but a lot of the local communities were set up where the initial master plan of the community was such that there would be a right of first refusal that had to be signed off on every future transaction. And that still happens today. And what we started seeing were some instances where those communities were enacting the right of first refusal and saying, I'll take that contract and we want to buy that property. So again, the committee comes along and basically says, we better add that in. Well, they added it in like 4 or 5 words in the middle of 2 commas that they just inserted. We sometimes see sellers get tripped up on that,
Sure.
right? Or sometimes they even forget, maybe you've owned a property for 15, 20 years and you forgot that there was a special assessment a handful of years ago for storm cleanup or something like that. That's an area where it's like, oh, I forgot. But it's asking that historical question.
Yes.
And you want to answer it correctly.
Yes. It's great information. And the other thing that I have seen just in practice is when a seller takes this very seriously and fills it out and puts everything in there, and they're particular about dates and they're particular about each and every item, and they maybe add addendum and things like that. What does that do? It raises the bar. The confidence level of the buyer goes way up. Deals don't fall apart because of this or that. They fall apart because the buyer loses confidence in the product.
Yeah.
And a buyer can lose confidence in the product if this form is taken lightly.
Yeah. It's just, it's no different. You're talking about that, like thinking about you go buy somebody's used car, you show up and they've got all the records and all the details and everything this automobile has been through. It makes you feel better about it because you know that they care about it. And sometimes we see other listings in the MLS where no one's really paid much attention to it and they just go, no representation all the way through. Most buyers, and this is really a message as much for buyers as it is for sellers, because you get the opportunity to review this, you get to understand more about the history of the property, and you go through and you see that, you're like, really? Yeah. Come on, that's kind of a punt. Like you didn't really give it a good faith effort of sharing what you know about it.
And it doesn't take the liability off of the seller. If a seller decides they just don't want to take this seriously and they don't want to fill everything out, it does not limit their liability. Actually, it makes it worse. They're more at risk for a post-closing situation to develop. So this is an opportunity for the seller to really communicate with the buyer what they know about the property, and it's an opportunity for the seller to safeguard against future situations.
Yeah, we call it the stay out of jail free card. Like this is your opportunity to make sure that anything that you're obligated to disclose, this is your channel, your vehicle for doing it. And a little catch on that too, a lot of people don't know this, but as the real estate agent for the seller, if the real estate agent is aware of a material defect or challenge or problem with the property, and the seller is electing not to disclose it, which I would hope that no seller would do that. But if you had that situation, the agent has the obligation to disclose it, which is a little awkward if the seller's not moving forward and doing that. And the other thing that I think, sometimes sellers will say, well, it's a second home or a third home or investment property. I really don't know much about the property. Hard for me to answer questions. It's not atypical for a seller to hire a home inspector and say, you know what, for the things that most buyers want to know about, the physical plant of the property, tell me what the condition is. We've even seen sellers just attach the whole inspection report because they feel like, gosh, how could it get any better than that?
Right. And the home inspector's not going to fill this out, but you can do a link to maybe the home inspection. You could extract some information from the home inspection and fill this out.
Yeah.
But again, it's on the seller to do for themselves.
Of course, yeah, but that might be a tool to help them with, or maybe you've got a relative that's in town and can help you fill it out. Sometimes we meet with folks and we want to introduce this form to them right away, and just the initial listing process, we tell people the best place and time to complete it is when you're in the property, like where you're actually answering the questions about it and you're able to go and look and pull the information together.
Really helps. It's a lot easier to do it while you're here. So we'll sometimes meet with folks that are coming into town. This is a second home. First thing we give them is this. We say, just while you're here, just kind of go through this and fill out what you can and start on the form. And a lot of times we say, just start in pencil.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the final document. And the other thing is rely on your agent, rely on your attorney to ask questions about the questions.
Right.
So if you're not understanding something on the form, ask for some clarification, ask for some examples of what they're asking for. They should be able to help you. They're just not going to tell you the answer.
Right. Yeah. They can give you context. Again, like from our perspective, we deal with this on just about every single transaction. We know what the intention of the questions, generally speaking, is. And when you're looking at things like, I have no idea, somebody might say, I don't even know what a right of first refusal is. Your agent should be able to kind of answer that.
I'm really glad we do this video because this is important. This is a part of almost, like you said at the beginning, almost every contract of sale we deal with. And it is important. And it's important to take seriously, not lightly. It's important to look at it in advance, to learn about it, to understand it. It's important for buyers to pay attention to it, to ask questions about things that they don't quite understand or they want more information on. And it's really important for sellers to take this seriously. It's not just something to scribble down, send it on, and forget about it.
Yeah, you can go 5 years or a year or whatever after you've negotiated a transaction, and you might even forget exactly what price you paid for the house.
Yeah.
But you're going to remember these core components, because if there was something that wasn't disclosed property or you wish you'd ask more questions about, those are the things that are going to stick with you, which is why we want to just make sure we could break it down today. And guys, like we said, we want you to be able to get a copy of this. You can download it online. We're glad to email it to you as well. But it's it's not an exciting read, but if you're all about this stuff like we are, it's so important. And if you're anticipating being involved in a transaction, having your eyes on that ahead of time, not just when they drop it, you want to go on the market tomorrow, is super smart. So
Agreed.
Hopefully this is helpful for you guys. As always, we appreciate your time and watching us, and we'll talk to you guys soon.